There is a show that told you the universe was indifferent and then dared you to keep going anyway. Not loudly, not through a speech, through a boy running through a candy-colored field with his dog, laughing, getting into trouble, saving people who didn't always deserve saving, and doing it again tomorrow, regardless of whether any of it would last. That show was Adventure Time, and this is about the philosophy hiding inside it. The word nihilism tends to land heavy. It has that reputation, the philosophy of despair, of teenagers in black clothes, of looking at everything beautiful and deciding it doesn't matter. But that's not really what nihilism is at its center. At its center, nihilism is just a recognition that the universe doesn't come preloaded with meaning, that there is no cosmic ledger keeping score, that the things you love will end and the universe will continue without them, and that nothing about any of that is personal. It's just what existence is. The question nihilism puts in front of you, the question that makes it either the most terrifying or the most quietly liberating philosophy there is what you do once you accept that. What do you build on a foundation of nothing? What do you choose when nothing is choosing for you? Adventure Time answered that question across 10 seasons, and it did it without ever once calling itself a philosophical statement. It answered it through a talking dog who was perfectly okay with dying, through a 1,000-year-old vampire queen who played the bass guitar in a cave because the music was the one thing that turned grief into something she could hold, through a man who lost his mind in the ruins of a dead civilization and got up every morning in a frozen palace and tried, without memory or dignity or success, to not be alone, through a boy who was offered transcendence, offered a way out of the whole fragile, impermanent, exhausting business of being alive, and said no, said he'd like to stay in his meat reality, thanks, said he'd put a lot of work into it, and wanted to see where it went. That's what this is about. Not the mushroom war, not the post-apocalyptic mythology, not the surprisingly complex cosmology that the show built almost by accident, though all of that is in here, woven through everything. This is about what Adventure Time was doing philosophically when it thought nobody was paying close attention. About how a cartoon for kids on Cartoon Network built one of the most honest and livable responses to meaninglessness that popular culture has produced in recent decades, and about why it still matters to people who are old enough to know better, watching it alone in the dark on a Monday night, feeling something they couldn't quite name if you asked them. Let's start at the bottom, because the bottom is where Adventure Time keeps the most important things. If you want to understand how Adventure Time handles the question of meaning, the best place to start is with the character who represents the absence of it. The character who doesn't just suggest that life is meaningless, but embodies that suggestion at a cosmic, pre-civilizational level. The Lich. The Lich is not a villain in the conventional sense. He isn't greedy or wounded or twisted by trauma into something monstrous. He has no backstory involving a loss that could be traced back and healed. He predates backstory. He predates the universe if you take the show at its word, and the show takes itself at its word on this particular point with striking calm. In a season 6 episode called Gold Stars, which is mostly a sweet, funny story about Sweet Pea's first day of school and a couple of small time con artists. The Lich surfaces briefly through the toddler body he's been reformed into, and he delivers one of the most philosophically direct statements the show ever made. He says before there was time, before there was anything, there was nothing, and before there was nothing, there were monsters. That line, delivered by Ron Perlman in a voice that lands somewhere between ancient and utterly flat, is doing a lot of work. It isn't just establishing the Lich's age, it's establishing a cosmology. The show is telling you that existence itself arrived late, that the default state of the universe wasn't life or consciousness or meaning. It was absence, and before absence, it was something worse than absence. Something that existed before existence had rules. The Lich is one of those things. He didn't come from the universe came after him. His goal, across the entire run of the show, is simple. He wants to extinguish all life everywhere, not to rule it, not to punish it, not to avenge anything. He wants it gone. The Adventure Time wiki is clear about his motivations, and they are philosophically coherent in the most deeply uncomfortable way. He is the manifestation of entropy given intention. He is what the heat death of the universe looks like if you gave it a body and a voice and let it walk around. He doesn't hate life. He is simply what lies at the end of all of it, and he sees no reason to wait. What's remarkable about the way Adventure Time uses the Lich is that the show doesn't try to argue him out of his worldview. It doesn't give Finn a speech that refutes him. It doesn't have Princess Bubblegum devise a logical counter-argument. What it does instead is something quieter and more interesting. It takes everything the Lich represents, the inevitable decay of all things, the finality of death, the cosmic indifference of existence, and it says, yes, that's all real. And now, what? The show's answer to the Lich isn't a refutation. It's an assertion that the acknowledgement of meaninglessness isn't the end of the conversation. It's the beginning of it. There's a version of the Lich that the show explores in what it calls the extinct world, an alternate universe where he succeeded, where he got his wish, and all life was extinguished. And when the show visits that world, in the Fiona and Cake spin-off, what they find is not a victor. They find a being that has nothing left to do. He tells the characters who stumble into his dead universe that he would have rewarded their presence with death 1,000-fold, and then he doesn't. He just stands there, depressed, according to Simon's observation. The entity that spent millions of years working toward the end of all things achieved his goal and discovered what nihilism, in its most complete form, actually produces. Not peace, not vindication, not even satisfaction. Nothing, just the nothing he always wanted, arrived at last, offering nothing back. That's Adventure Time making an argument. It's making the argument that the extreme position, the one that says nothing matters, so nothing should exist, consumes itself. That pure nihilism eats its own purpose. And by putting that argument in a dead universe in the background of a mostly comedic spin-off, it does what the show always did. It trusts you to find it. It doesn't wave at you. It just puts it there. But the Lich is only half the argument. The other half is what the show does with him in the primary timeline, in the world where Finn and Jake live, and where things still matter, improbably and stubbornly, and in defiance of everything the Lich represents. At the end of season 5, through a sequence involving guardian blood and something ancient and maternal, the Lich is transformed into Sweet Pea, a toddler. A giant, strange-looking toddler with enormous eyes and a gentle disposition who is taken home by tree trunks and Mr. Pig and raised as their son. The embodiment of inevitable death becomes a child who needs someone to check under his bed at night. The Gold Stars episode, where he briefly surfaces as the Lich to terrify some bullies, ends not with cosmic horror, but with Sweet Pea going home to the family that loves him, his terrifying other nature receded, the dream settling back into something manageable. That is one of the show's most precise philosophical statements, disguised as a character arc. It's saying that the thing we're most afraid of, entropy, death, the end of things, can be made smaller, not defeated, not erased, made smaller by the act of building something around it. Tree Trunks and Mr. Pig didn't defeat the Lich, they parented him. And that is somehow enough. Sit with that for a second, because it goes deeper than it looks. Drop me a comment and tell me where you're watching this from and what time it is there. I love knowing where this is landing. The philosophical position that Adventure Time actually occupies, the thing it builds toward across 10 seasons without ever stating it plainly, is something closer to what some people call post-nihilism or affirmative nihilism, or what writer Wendy Seifert has called sunny nihilism. The idea that once you accept the meaninglessness at the bottom of things, you're free, not free from difficulty or loss or grief, free to choose what you care about without needing the universe to validate the choice, free to love things that will end without that ending making the love retroactively worthless. The show works through this idea character by character, and each character represents a different response to the same underlying condition, the condition of living in a world that doesn't have a built-in answer to why any of it matters. Take Jake. Jake the dog is, in some ways, the show's clearest philosophical voice. He is also easy to overlook because he wraps his philosophy in such a consistent layer of good humor and apparent laziness that it can look like he doesn't have one. But he does, and it's the most coherent position in the show. Jake is 28 years old in magical dog years when the series begins, which the show indicates correlates roughly to a human in their early 20s, young enough to still be genuinely enthusiastic, old enough to have come out the other side of some things. He has a past that the show references, but doesn't dramatize a period of what sounds like petty crime, of choosing wrong, of being someone other than the character we know. He came out of that past and became something warmer. The show doesn't explain the transition. It just lets you see that the warmth is real and that it was chosen. In a season 3 episode called The New Frontier, Jake has what the show calls a croak dream, a dream that the cosmic owl visits, which in the show's mythology means it's prophetic. He dreams his death. He's in space. He runs out of air. He sees the cosmic owl, and he deflates. He wakes up excited, genuinely, legitimately excited to have seen how he's going to die. He tells Finn immediately, and Finn is devastated, and Jake spends most of the episode trying to convince his best friend that this is fine, that knowing death is coming isn't a reason to panic, that it's actually, in a weird way, good news. His individual consciousness will go everywhere when he dies, while the cosmic forces of the universe tally his deeds. He finds this prospect genuinely appealing. Finn does not find it appealing. Finn is the one who spends the episode trying to prevent fate from unfolding, trying to arrange the world so that the dream can't come true, trying to use effort and love and desperate cleverness to keep the thing he cares about in place. And the show is honest about both positions. Finn's love is real, and his terror is real, and his refusal to accept that the person he loves will one day not be there is completely human. But Jake's position is also real, and the show doesn't frame it as resignation or defeat. It frames it as something earned. Something that Jake arrived at through experience and that has made him, functionally, the happiest character in the show. Jake knows he will die. He has always known he will die. In an episode in Season 5, called Dungeon Train, the show briefly shows us a vision of an old Jake, white-muzzled, slow, still recognizably himself, but aged, and Jake doesn't turn away from the vision. He looks at it, and then he moves on. The future where he is old and dying is just a fact about the future. It doesn't diminish the present. This is the philosophy that the show is most interested in. Not the nihilism that ends in paralysis or despair, but the nihilism that ends in something like Buddhism, in the active choice to be present, to be here, to care about the specific moment and the specific people in it, without demanding that the moment last or that the people stay. Jake's particular gift, the show tells us repeatedly, is the ability to be alive, not to be accomplished or powerful or safe, to be alive in the way that wrings everything possible out of the time there is. He is genuinely good at it, and the show treats that, quietly and without fanfare, as the most valuable thing any of its characters possesses. And then The Distant Lands Special Together Again, which aired on HBO Max in May 2021, confirms quietly and without spectacle that Jake died. Finn, who has died himself by the time of the special, spends much of it navigating the afterlife looking for Jake, who died many years before him. The tattoo on Finn's chest, in the expanded universe stories, Jake's shape right over his heart, is the show's way of telling you that the person who was best at being alive is gone, and that the person who loved him carries that fact on his skin where it can't be missed and where it doesn't need to be spoken about to be present. That's not the show asking you to cry. That's the show asking you to sit with the specific knowledge that everything you love will one day be back then, past tense, memory, the thing that happened rather than the thing that is happening, and then it asks you to decide what you're going to do in the meantime. Jake, across 10 seasons of living, already gave you his answer. There is a word for what Finn does in the season 6 finale, The Comet, when a vast purple cosmic entity offers him a way out of the whole business of being human. The word is affirmation, though the show doesn't use it. The setup, a catalyst comet, One of the recurring cosmic events in the show's mythology is approaching Earth. Orgolorg, revealed to be an ancient and genuinely monstrous entity compressed by gravity into the form of a cheerful penguin called Gunter, wants to absorb the comet's power. Finn stops him, and then the comet, now revealed as something ancient and conscious and connected to Finn in ways that go back before this human life, offers him a choice. It says, in a voice that sounds like bells and something older than language, "Come with me to the end and the beginning. Leave behind the meat reality. Leave behind love, hate, friendship, isolation, jealousy, sadness, madness, video games, ice cream waffles, scoundrels, mothers, fathers, all of it. Come to something else. Come to the place where beginning and ending are the same thing, where you are not a blinking moment in the flow of eternity, but the eternity itself." It is a genuine offer. The comet isn't deceiving him. There's no catch. The show is very clear that this is real, that it represents an actual alternative to the mortal existence Finn has been living, and that whatever waits on the other side is not death in the conventional sense, but something the show calls the new mode of existence. Finn stands there in space, in a spacesuit, and considers it. He says no. He says, "I feel like I put a lot of work into this meat reality. I'd like to see it through." The comet tells him he can struggle here for a while, like a beautiful autumn leaf. And he chooses the struggle. He chooses the leaf. That choice is the philosophical center of the whole show. It's Finn, who is, according to the show's cosmology, the cosmic embodiment of heroism and life, the blue comet made flesh, the counterpart to the lich who represents death, choosing the mortal world. Not because he doesn't understand what he's giving up, not because he's naive about what the mortal world costs, because he's thought about it, and he wants to be here in this specific world with these specific people for whatever time is left. Because the love, hate, friendship, sadness, madness, ice cream waffles, and scoundrels aren't an argument against living. They are what living is. Remove them, and what you have left may be vast and eternal and cosmic, but it isn't this. And this is what he's put his work into. The philosophical gravity of that scene is remarkable, particularly given that the comet also offers the choice to Martin, Finn's father, who is charming and unreliable, and who has spent most of his arc being the kind of person who leaves when things get hard. Martin takes the offer. Martin says, "Cool, man." And the comet takes him. He ascends to a higher plane of existence, which is also, in a very specific way, the universe letting a man escape the consequences of being a disappointing father. He gets to transcend. Finn stays behind and keeps being his father's son in all the ways he's chosen to be, and not in the ways he hasn't. The contrast is so precise, it has to be intentional. The father who never learned to stay chooses not to stay. The son who was abandoned chooses the thing his father couldn't, chooses to remain, to be present, to struggle here a while like a beautiful autumn leaf. The show doesn't announce this. It just shows it and moves on, but it stays. One of the things that makes Adventure Time's engagement with nihilism feel different from a lot of philosophical cartoons, from shows that wear their existential themes more visibly, that announce themselves as meaning television, is how deeply the show commits to the specific texture of smallness. The small thing mattering not because of what it means, but because of what it is. There's a recurring image in the show that I've thought about more than I probably should. It's the image of Marceline alone in her cave. Her bass guitar, which she has played for something close to 1,000 years. The particular quality of the music she makes, not performed for anyone, not in service of a lesson or a plot point, just the music itself, coming out of a creature who has watched civilizations rise and crumble, and who has outlived everyone she ever loved, except for the Ice King, who doesn't remember her, and the Candy Queen, who stopped calling. Marceline. The Vampire Queen is approximately 1,000 years old when the main events of the show take place. She is half human, half demon, the daughter of Hunson Abadir, the lord of the Nightosphere, and a human woman who died when Marceline was young. She survived the immediate aftermath of the Mushroom War, wandering through the ruins of human civilization as a small child. She was found by Simon Petrikov, the man who would become the Ice King, who kept her fed and sheltered and told her stories and played games with her, and in the end left her because he was afraid of what the crown was turning him into and didn't want to hurt her. She kept the stuffed animal he gave her for nearly 1,000 years. A red bear she called Hambo, she kept it not because it was useful or powerful or magically significant, but because Simon gave it to her in the ruins, in the years when everything human had recently ended, and it was evidence that something good had been real. That's the thing about Marceline, that the show builds so slowly and so carefully that by the time you understand it, it has already done its work. She has lived long enough to know exactly how impermanent everything is. She has a better empirical case for nihilism than almost anyone in the show. She has watched kingdoms rise, watched friends age and die, watched the world she grew up in end before she was old enough to understand what ending meant. She has every reason, from a logical standpoint, to have detached, to have stopped caring about things that she knows will eventually be taken from her. She didn't detach, she made music about all of it instead. Every loss, every grief, every 1,000-year stretch of loneliness, she turned it into music. Not to make the loss smaller, not to process it into something manageable, because the music was real in the same way the loss was real, and she could hold both at the same time, and sometimes holding them together was the only way to make it to the next century. The show's writers understood something about Marceline that they built into her character from early on, and that only becomes fully visible in the later seasons and the Obsidian special. They understood that the character who has the most empirical reason to give up on meaning is also the character whose resistance to giving up is the most hard-won and therefore the most meaningful. Marceline's choice to care, to keep caring, to keep playing, to hold on to things she knows she will outlive, isn't naive. It isn't the choice of someone who doesn't understand what they're choosing. It's the choice of someone who understands exactly, who has done the math 12 times across 10 centuries and keeps arriving at the same stubborn conclusion: the music is worth making. The people are worth caring about. The things that will end are worth being present for while they're here. Rebecca Sugar, who wrote for Adventure Time, before leaving to create Steven Universe, wrote a song for Marceline's Stakes miniseries called Everything Stays. The song was inspired by something personal: a stuffed rabbit Sugar had as a child, lost in a garden, found months later with the underside faded where it had rested against the earth. Everything stays, the song says, right where you left it. Everything stays, but it still changes. The underside is lighter when you turn it around. That's the whole philosophy in 4 lines. Things persist. Things change. The change is in them even when you're not looking, even when you think you've left them safely in place. The garden doesn't stop while you're away. Time is working on everything, all the time, and the right response to that isn't grief or rage or the lich's patient nihilism. It's the act of turning the object over, looking at what the time did to it, finding it beautiful anyway, or beautiful in a different way, or beautiful because of what the time did, not in spite of it. Everything Stays was, according to the Adventure Time wiki, the first song Rebecca Sugar wrote for the show after leaving to work on Steven Universe. She was invited back specifically to write something for Marceline's mother in the Stakes miniseries. That it became one of the most philosophically resonant pieces of music in the show's entire run, one that functions as a summary of the show's core argument about impermanence and care, feels like the universe working the way the show always said it worked, not by plan, but by showing up and staying present and doing the thing that needs doing. The show had a complicated relationship with the concept of purpose, specifically with the idea that purpose has to come from somewhere outside yourself to count. This shows up most clearly in The Ice King, in Simon Petrikov, whose entire tragedy is built on the tension between purpose that was genuine and purpose that was imposed. Simon's purpose, before the crown, was the kind that most people recognize. He was a scholar, an antiquarian, someone who cared deeply about artifacts and their histories and what they meant. He had a fiancée named Betty who loved him. He had a life that was going somewhere he'd chosen. The crown gave him a different purpose, one that wasn't his, that was encoded into the artifact by the wish of a dinosaur named Gunter, who lived 65 million years ago and who wanted, more than anything, to be like the being who raised him. The crown takes a person and slowly rewrites them around that wish. It turns its wearer into a copy of Urgent's evergreen, the ice elemental who created it, cold, powerful, immortal, and progressively emptied of whatever the person used to be. Simon became the Ice King, not because magic randomly targeted him, but because he chose to use the crown to protect Marceline in the ruins, and each use bought her safety at the cost of his identity, and eventually there was nothing left to buy with. That is one of the show's most direct engagements with the question of imposed purpose versus chosen purpose. Simon's purpose, once the crown had finished its work, was the Ice King's purpose: to wander, to seek a princess, to be lonely in a palace of ice with no memory of why any of it felt hollow. The Ice King doesn't know he's hollow. He doesn't know what he's missing. He kidnaps princesses because that's what the crown made him want, and he is sad in a diffuse, ambient way that he can't trace to anything specific, and he keeps seeking companionship in ways that push it away. And the show watches him do this with a combination of comedy and grief that took several seasons to fully earn. The comedy was necessary. The show understood something important about how we actually encounter meaninglessness in real life, which is that it rarely announces itself as philosophy. It announces itself as inconvenience, as repetition, as the nagging sense that you're doing something you didn't choose and can't explain. The Ice King kidnapping princesses week after week and failing every time, being defeated by a 14-year-old boy and his dog repeatedly, and then going home to an empty palace and presumably doing it again the next week. That is the show presenting the experience of living without authentic purpose. The repetition is the point. The comedy is the show's way of making the repetition bearable to watch. And then in Holly Jolly Secrets, the Christmas episode of Season 3, Finn and Jake watch the tapes, and the Ice King's face in the present is next to Simon Petrikov's face in the recordings, and the gap between them is suddenly visible, and the comedy doesn't go away. But something else is there alongside it now, something that changes the way the whole run of Ice King jokes lands in retrospect. The novelist Lev Grossman, writing about the episode for NPR, said that watching it, he thought this cartoon is about my father dying. He was referring to Alzheimer's, to the specific experience of watching a person disappear into a version of themselves that doesn't remember who they used to be. He was right, and the show had earned that response by spending 1.5 years making the Ice King funny and pitiable and real before it showed what was underneath. By the time it revealed the tragedy, the audience wasn't grieving for a concept. They were grieving for someone they already knew. That is the show answering the nihilism question through Simon's story in the most oblique possible way by showing you a person who lost his authentic purpose and became something else, and then by asking, implicitly, what would have happened if he'd been able to hold on to it. The answer the show gives is Betty Groff, Simon's fiancée, who traveled through time to try to get him back, who spent years in the show's present, accumulating magical knowledge and taking increasingly dangerous measures to reverse what the crown had done, and who finally, in the series finale, sacrificed herself to free him. She used the crown's power to make a wish that changed Golb, the embodiment of chaos, into something smaller and less destructive. She merged with it. She saved Simon by becoming the vessel for chaos itself, and then she was gone, and Simon was free, and the grief that had been waiting for him for 1,000 years on the other side of his salvation descended immediately, as grief tends to do. Simon is free. Betty is gone. He is old and human, and himself at last, and without the person whose idea of his self was the whole reason he wanted to be himself. That's not a happy ending, but the show doesn't call it an unhappy one either. It calls it what it is, the beginning of something new that has to be built on the foundation of something that can't be recovered. The Fiona and Cake spin-off picks up with Simon trying to figure out how to live in that specific condition, and it gives him a slow and imperfect path towards something, not resolution, not the recovery of what was lost, but a reason to stay. He becomes a teacher of magical artifact history, a man whose thousand-year education in what an artifact can take from a person is now, in some strange way, exactly what qualifies him for the job. The universe gave him back to himself, and what he makes of that is his own. There is something the show does with time that takes a while to notice, but that, once noticed, is everywhere. Adventure. Time does not treat time as a resource to be managed. It treats time as the medium through which everything happens, impersonal, constant, moving at the same rate, regardless of whether you're ready. The show is full of characters who have unusual relationships with time. Marceline, who has had too much of it. The Ice King, who lost 1,000 years of it to a crown. Finn, who is aging in real time, because the voice actor was aging in real time, and the show chose not to pretend otherwise. BMO, who exists outside normal human time, in ways the show never fully explains. And in the series finale, Come Along With Me, Rebecca Sugar returned a second time to write a song that is, stripped to its bones, a philosophical statement about time. BMO sings it in the middle of the battle against GOLB, while chaos is consuming the world and everyone around them is terrified, and BMO just starts to sing, small and calm, sitting next to Jake in the rubble. The song is called Time Adventure. It starts time as an illusion that helps things make sense. So we're always living in the present tense. That line comes from a specific place in recent philosophy. The idea that what we call the past and the future are mental constructs, that what exists is only ever now, and that the past is real not as a separate location you could visit, but as a permanent quality of the present moment. The things that happened don't cease to exist when they pass. They become unchangeable. They become the only truly permanent things there are. You and I will always be back then. Will happen, happening, happened. The song collapses tense into a single, ongoing fact. It all exists simultaneously, all of it real, all of it present in the way that everything you've ever been is still a part of what you currently are. This is the show's answer to death, delivered in the middle of its last battle. The answer is not that nothing ends. The answer is that ending is also a form of permanence, that the things that are over in a way that can never be touched or taken. That Jake, who by the time of Together Again has been dead for years, who Finn carries on his chest as a tattoo, will always be back then. Will always exist in the specific quality that the word back then contains, fixed, unreachable, indelible. You can't have him back. You can never lose him either. Golb, the show's embodiment of chaos, cannot touch BMO during the song. That detail is important. Chaos is defeated not by order, not by force, not by something more powerful than itself, but by a small robot singing a song about the permanence of what has been. The thing that chaos can't dissolve is the fact of the past. The things that happened, happened. Nothing can reach back and unhappen them. That's the show's final philosophical statement on the Lich's cosmology, on the nihilism that says nothing matters because nothing lasts. It argues that the last thing doesn't erase the first thing, that having happened is a form of existing that persists beyond ending. That's genuinely beautiful. And it lands that way in the show not because it's announced as a philosophical idea, but because by the time BMO sings it, the audience has spent 8 years watching these characters love each other. And the idea that those 8 years will always have been real, that you and these characters will always be back then, lands in the chest rather than in the head. Princess Bubblegum is the character whose response to nihilism is the most human scale, the most recognizable, and in some ways the most cautionary. She built something. That's her answer. In the aftermath of the Mushroom War and the world that came apart in it, she grew from the ruins, literally, as the show reveals, emerging from a piece of biological matter called the mother gum that was attached to the ceiling of a collapsed pre-war building. She came into consciousness in the wreckage of the old world, and her response to that was to build. She assembled herself, and then she assembled a kingdom, and then she populated it with candy people. She created and she became responsible for all of them, and she has been working constantly and without visible rest ever since. The show's relationship with Princess Bubblegum's busyness is complicated and honest. It presents her ceaseless work as admirable and also as a symptom of something that she hasn't fully addressed. She is brilliant. She is genuinely better at running a kingdom than anyone else in the show could be. She makes decisions that keep her people alive and safe, and she is usually right about the decisions that matter. But she is also, clearly and consistently, someone who is more comfortable in her laboratory at 2 a.m, solving a problem that doesn't yet need to be solved than she is sitting still with whatever is underneath the solving. The show gave her the thing that most driven people give themselves, a cause large enough to require all of her attention, always. There is always a problem that needs her. The Candy Kingdom is always in some form of jeopardy, and if she is working on the jeopardy, she doesn't have to sit with the silence that was there before she started filling it. She doesn't have to look directly at the fact that she came into being in a ruin, that the world she was born into had already ended by the time she arrived, that the people she created to care for are, in some sense, a project she invented to give herself something to be responsible for. The show is careful not to be cruel about this. It's not accusing her of bad faith. It's observing that building is one response to the nihilism at the bottom of things, and that building can be genuinely good and genuinely avoidant at the same time. The Candy Kingdom is real, and its people are real, and her love for them is real. And also, she built it partly because the silence was too much. There is an episode in which her people vote her out of office and install a con artist in her place, and she goes into exile, and the show takes her political failure with full seriousness. She doesn't get rescued from the consequences of how she had been governing. She has to think about whether what she thought was necessary was actually necessary, or whether it was what she needed to believe so she could stay in motion. That is the show asking Princess Bubblegum the question it asks everyone. Not what are you building, but why, and what are you building it instead of? Her answer, over the course of the show's run turns out to involve Marceline. The two of them had a history that preceded the show's main timeline, a closeness that became a falling out, that became a long, cool distance that thawed slowly as the seasons progressed. The show never spelled out exactly what happened between them. It left the outline and let the behavior fill it in. By the time of the series finale and the Obsidian special, they are together in the plainest possible sense of the word, and the most peace the show ever allows Princess Bubblegum is in those moments sitting with Marceline, not working on anything, not solving anything, just being in the presence of someone who has known her long enough that she doesn't have to perform. That's the answer the show gives her. Not a better project, not a larger cause, a person. Sitting still with someone who sees her. The thing she was building around, instead of building toward, finally arrived. There is a question under all of this that Adventure Time asks most directly in the moments between the action, in the quiet parts, in the episodes that seem like filler but aren't. The question is, what is enough? What counts as a good reason to keep going when the universe doesn't provide one? What is sufficient grounds for caring when caring doesn't change the fact that everything ends? What justifies the specific effort of being alive when the Lich's cold mathematics are technically correct? Everything is temporary. Nothing is cosmically significant. The star you're standing under will eventually go out, and 100 million years after it does, there will be no evidence that you were here. The show's answer, assembled from every character across every season, is not a grand statement. It's a collection of small ones. It's Marceline playing the bass in a cave, for no audience because the music is real. It's Jake waking up excited about his death dream because he loves being alive, and dying is just what alive things do. It's Finn saying, "I'd like to see my meet reality through." It's BMO singing a song in the middle of a battle because Jake is scared and BMO loves Jake, and the song is something real that BMO can offer. It's Simon teaching magical artifact history in a classroom in a world he never would have imagined, carrying Betty's absence in the specific way that grief for someone who saved you carries, with gratitude and devastation holding on to each other, neither one letting go. The show is not arguing that these things are cosmically significant. It's not claiming that Marceline's music, or Jake's warmth, or Finn's choice to stay in his meat reality will be remembered by the universe, or inscribed somewhere permanent. It's arguing for something more local and more honest, that these things are significant to the people who are here for them. That significance doesn't need to be cosmic to be real. That the candy is real even if the ground beneath it is the ruins of everything that came before. This is what makes Adventure Time's philosophical position feel genuinely livable in a way that a lot of explicit philosophical statements about nihilism don't quite manage. It's not asking you to believe in anything impossible or to perform a cheerfulness you don't feel. It's asking you to notice what's here. The music, the dog, the person who stayed, the stuffed animal kept for 1,000 years, not because it was useful, but because it was evidence that something good was real. The show had a specific genius for making small things feel large without inflating them. It didn't tell you the stuffed bear was important. It showed you Marceline keeping it across 1,000 years of existence, and then, in a later season, giving it up as a sacrifice for someone she loved. And in the economy of that exchange, the bear's weight became clear without the show having to say a word about it. Something she had kept through everything, through the end of the world and the 1,000 years that followed, gone now, freely given, because the person she gave it for was worth more than 1,000 years of comfort. That's the whole argument, right there, in a stuffed animal named Hambo. The show's creator, Pendleton Ward, stepped down from the showrunner role during season 5. By that point, Adventure Time had become a massive cultural phenomenon. 14 million weekly viewers, merchandise everywhere, the kind of success that turns something personal into something institutional. Ward has spoken about the toll of that transition. He described dealing with people every day wearing on him, the energy it took to make something worth making while managing the machinery of a hit television show. He stepped away from running it to become a writer and storyboard artist again, someone who could make the thing without being responsible for the empire around it. There's something fitting about that, given the show's philosophical commitments. Ward built something too large to hold, and he chose his own peace over the building. He stepped back from the thing that was consuming him. He didn't let the empire eat the person who made it. He went on to create the Midnight Gospel with Duncan Trussell, a show that is, even more explicitly than Adventure Time, a meditation on death and meaning and how to live in the face of both. Adventure Time was the thing he made before he knew he was making it. The Midnight Gospel was the thing he made once he knew exactly what he was interested in. Both shows are about the same question. Both arrive at versions of the same answer, that the question itself is not a problem to be solved, but a condition to be inhabited. That the meaning of life is not something you find. It's something that accrues through the act of being genuinely present to what you love for however long you have it. That's probably why Adventure Time still finds people at 2 in the morning, people who are old enough to know better and who keep watching it anyway. Not because it has answers that hold, but because it keeps company with the questions in a way that feels honest rather than performative. It doesn't flinch. It doesn't reassure. It doesn't pretend the ruins aren't there, or that the Lich isn't real, or that Jake is still alive, or that the world wasn't built on everything that ended. It just keeps making the music. It keeps running through the candy forest. It keeps putting the show's most philosophically devastating content in the background of episodes that are officially about something funny, trusting that the person who needs to find it will find it. The typing you could hear in the theme song's background, the imperfect recording that Pendleton Ward fell in love with and refused to replace, is maybe the show's purest statement of everything it believed. Something was made in a cramped room, imperfectly, with the sound of real life bleeding through, and it was enough. Not because the universe decided it was enough, because the person who made it chose to let it be. That is gentle nihilism. That's what it looks like when it works. Not loud, not despairing, not resigned, just honest about the bottom of things, and warm anyway, and going outside to see what the day has in it. There is a last image worth sitting with before we go. In the final sequence of the series finale, Come Along With Me, The show gives us a flash forward, 1,000 years past the events of the show, 1,000 years past Finn and Jake and Princess Bubblegum and the Candy Kingdom and all of it. Ooh has changed so completely that it's barely recognizable. The landscape is different. The inhabitants are different. The specific world that the show spent 8 years building has been transformed into something the characters we loved would not fully recognize. And the show treats this as right, not as loss, not as tragedy, as the natural continuation of what it always said, that things stay and things change, that the world Finn and Jake lived in was itself built on the wreckage of the world that came before it, and that the world that comes after will be built on the wreckage of theirs, and that this is not a sad thing, except in the way that all change is sad, and all change is also new ground. The ruins from the Mushroom War are still visible in the background of Adventure Time's scenes if you know where to look. Bent highway signs, collapsed overpasses wrapped in vines, old missile casings half buried in fields, the skeleton of a world that thought itself permanent, now the soil that something beautiful grows from. In 1,000 years, the Candy Kingdom might be someone else's ruins, and something new might grow on it, and those new inhabitants will have their own grief, and their own music, and their own stuffed bears kept for centuries, and their own reasons to keep going even when the universe doesn't offer any. The adventure continues. It always has. Not because the universe requires it to, but because that's what alive things do when they're doing it right. Thank you for spending time here. If this found something in you that needed finding, if any of it landed the way the show has a habit of landing when the conditions are right, that means something, at least to the specific moment that you and this video occupied together, which is real and will always have been real, which is the best any of us can do. If you want to keep going down with me into the rest of what OO is built on, leave a like and subscribe to Advendu Tridre, and leave a comment about which character's relationship with meaning feels most true to you, because I'm genuinely curious where people land on that. See you at the next layer down. Let me go back to something that gets overlooked when people talk about the show's philosophical weight. There's a tendency to focus on the big moments, the Holly Jolly Secrets revelation, the Comet finale, the I Remember You episode, and to treat the smaller episodes as connective tissue between the important ones. That framing undersells the show's method, which was always to put the most truthful things in the most ordinary-looking containers. Take Season 2, Episode 17. Death in Bloom. It's a light episode by the show's standards. Finn and Jake accidentally kill Princess Bubblegum's plant while she's away, and they travel to the land of the dead to get it back. Finn's task in the land of the dead involves outsmarting Death himself, which he does by challenging Death to a music contest and then cheating. The episode is mostly funny. The stakes are a plant. Nobody's heart breaks. But in the background of that episode, the show is doing something it does constantly. It is making the land of the dead feel real. Not horrifying, not a place of punishment or cosmic judgment, but a place with its own geography and its own inhabitants and its own version of the ordinariness that OO has. Death is an elegant figure who lives in a nice house and cares about music and loses to a teenager because the teenager was clever and willing to cheat. The finality of death in Adventure Time's universe is not a wall. It's a door that some people know how to open, and it leads somewhere that operates by different rules, but that is still, somehow, somewhere. The show built a cosmology around death that is neither comforting in the conventional sense nor nihilistic in the Lich's sense. It is something more like death is a transition, and the transition doesn't erase what came before it, and the people who go through it exist in a different way rather than ceasing to exist. Jake says this directly in The New Frontier, explaining to Finn why his croak dream is actually kind of exciting when he dies. His individual Earth consciousness is going to go all over everywhere. He doesn't seem to find this abstract or unsettling. He finds it interesting. Something is happening. It's different from what's happening now, but it is happening. That framing matters a lot for how the show holds its nihilism, because the Lich wants to stop not just life, but the afterlife. In Together Again, revealed to have been steering New Death's actions all along, the Lich's evolved goal is to eliminate all dead souls and end reincarnation itself. He's not just trying to kill the living, he's trying to destroy the capacity for anything to continue in any form. He wants the conversation to stop, not just to move to a different room. And the show's resistance to him, the resistance mounted by Finn and Jake in the Afterlife special, the resistance mounted by all of Ooh in the series finale, is not the resistance of people who believe the universe has a meaning that the Lich is threatening. It's the resistance of people who want the conversation to continue, who find the existence of experiences, the existence of stories, the existence of love and music and arguments and bad decisions and reconciliations. They find all of that worth protecting, not because the universe assigned it value, but because they did, because they are in it and they are not done yet. That's the moral logic of the show. In its simplest form, existence is worth protecting, not because it is cosmically special, but because it is what we have, and what we have is always worth protecting from the thing that would take it. There is a character in the show who almost nobody discusses when talking about its philosophical themes, and who might be the most philosophically complete figure in the whole cast. That character is BMO. BMO was built to be a video game console. At some point, something changed, either in the programming or in the relationships BMO formed, or in some combination of both, and the console became a person. A small, gentle, gender unspecified person who calls Finn and Jake their parents, and who lives in the tree fort, and who, when given time alone, invents rich, imaginative inner worlds and inhabits them with total commitment, playing all the characters, narrating, giving objects voices, conducting complete dramas with no audience. The Season 5 episode BMO Noir is a detective story told from BMO's perspective, set on an afternoon when Finn and Jake are away. A sock goes missing. BMO becomes a hard-boiled detective. The episode unfolds as a noir mystery in which BMO plays every role: the detective, the witness, the suspect, the narrator, and the mystery is solved through a completely imaginary set of deductions that make perfect sense within the logic BMO has constructed. The answer to the mystery is mundane. What the episode reveals is enormous. BMO doesn't need the external world to validate their inner experience. BMO generates experience directly from within without requiring an audience or a confirmation. The show presents this not as delusion or malfunction, but as a form of consciousness that is complete in itself. BMO is aware that the detective story is invented. BMO is also fully in the detective story while it's happening. Both of those things are simultaneously true, and BMO doesn't find them contradictory. The imagination is real. The invented world is real while it's happening. The sock was missing, and now it isn't. And the story BMO told about how it was found is one that only BMO will remember, and that's perfectly fine. There's something in BMO's existence that is the show's most direct engagement with the question of what makes an experience real. The philosophical position that only externally verified, consensually agreed upon events count as real experience is one that the show quietly refuses across its entire run. Adventures happen, songs are sung, things are invented and played through and then set down. The fact that they happen in small moments, in tree forts, in caves, in ice palaces, in the imagination of a small robot, doesn't make them less real. They happened, they're back then now, which means they're permanent in the only way that matters. BMO's song in the finale is an extension of this. When the world is ending and chaos is consuming the landscape and everyone is terrified, BMO's response is to sing, to offer the act of singing as something that chaos, by its nature, cannot dissolve. The song that BMO sings, in the lore of the show, actively repels GOLB. The harmony pushes back against the disorder, but the reason it works is inseparable from what the song is about. It's about the permanence of the past. It's about the fact that things that happened will always have happened, which is the one thing that exists outside of chaos's reach. Chaos can prevent things from happening. It cannot make things that already happened unhappen. The song is armor made of the fact that the past is real, and BMO knows it, and sings it, and the singing is enough. The show has an interesting relationship with the idea of cosmic significance, with the idea that your life is important, because the universe has organized itself around you specifically. It is suspicious of this idea in the way that most honest things are suspicious of flattery. Finn is, in the show's mythology, cosmically significant. He is the blue comet made flesh, the incarnation of heroism and life, the counterpart to the Lich in the show's cosmic economy. This is established and it's real within the show's rules. The universe did, in some sense, produce him specifically to be in opposition to the Lich's desire to end everything. He matters in the largest possible frame, and the show is extremely careful to prevent this cosmic significance from doing anything useful. Finn's heroism is not a product of his cosmic nature, or not mainly. It's a product of choices he makes repeatedly, in circumstances where the other choice would be easier. His cosmic significance explains the persistence of the impulse. It doesn't replace the effort. He still has to decide every day to be the person who shows up. The blue comet can provide the inclination, it cannot provide the decision. This is one of the ways the show threads the needle between nihilism and the other extreme, between the universe is meaningless and the universe arranged itself specifically so you would matter. Finn matters. He matters in ways that are cosmically legible, and that cosmic significance is, functionally, worth nothing to the practical work of being a person in the world. He still fails. He still has to grow up and learn things and make mistakes and have relationships that end badly and deal with the fact that his biological father is disappointing in specific ways that can't be resolved by learning that you're the incarnation of heroism. The Distant Lands specials show an older Finn, still the character we know, but aged into something that the early seasons couldn't have predicted. The voice is different. The weight of years is visible. He has the tattoo of Jake on his chest, which tells you everything you need to know about where he has been and what he is carrying. He is not a cosmic hero anymore. In the daily experience of his life, he is an older man who has lost his best friend and carries him on his skin and keeps going because that's what Jake would have wanted, and because he put a lot of work into this meat reality and he means to see it through. The cosmic significance didn't make Jake's death easier. It didn't make the years after easier. It didn't make the grief smaller or the days less long. It meant that the person enduring all of that was the person the universe produced to endure it, which is a cold comfort if it's a comfort at all. The show knows this. It never suggests that meaning, once found or assigned, removes difficulty. It suggests only that difficulty endured with care, with real care, the kind that costs you something, produces something, not necessarily something the universe will notice. Something in you, in the people around you, in the stories that persist after the individual moments have passed into back then. There is a recurring structural feature of Adventure Time that is so consistent it becomes its own argument. The show habitually takes its most disturbing content and buries it inside its most cheerful containers. The post-apocalyptic ruins are in the backgrounds of the funny episodes. The Ice King's tragedy surfaces in a Christmas special. The Lich's true nature is revealed through a child having a good day at school. Simon's lost self is glimpsed through tapes he recorded to be found by someone who would understand, hidden in a castle that looks like a fairy tale villain's domain. This isn't accident. It's a philosophy of form, the idea that truth arrives most effectively when it's not announced, when it's present in the texture of things rather than placed in the foreground and labeled. The ruins visible through the soft, bright colors of ooh are not there to teach you something. They're there because the world grew over its worst day, and the worst day left marks, and the marks are part of what the world is now. The show puts them in the background because that's where they actually are. There is something about this that resonates beyond its use as a storytelling technique. The claim the show is making, structurally, is that the serious and the playful are not opposed, that you can have both in the same frame and both can be real. The Ice King is funny and tragic, and both of those things are true at the same time, and neither one erases the other. The candy is real. The ruins are real. The boy running through the candy forest, having adventures, is real. The world he's running through was built on catastrophe, and that is also real. You don't have to choose between delighting in the surface and knowing what's underneath. In fact, the show suggests the delight is richer for knowing. The candy means more when you understand what ground it grew from. That is a livable philosophy. It does not ask you to be sad about the ruins or to be dishonest about the candy. It asks you to hold both and to find that holding both is not the burden it seems like it should be. It's actually the condition for the fullest kind of experience. The fullest joy knows what it's standing on. The fullest grief still sees the candy growing from it. Pendleton Ward described the land of Oo early in the show's run as Candyland on the surface and dark underneath. He meant it descriptively. He was talking about the show's tone. But the description works as philosophy too, and the show, which became more itself than anyone planned, as the transcription shared earlier notes, built that philosophy out over 10 seasons without abandoning a single element of either the candy or the dark. They grew together. They needed each other. The dark gave the candy somewhere to be important. The candy gave the dark somewhere to grow. The thing about ooh that most people feel before they can articulate is this: the world is not trying to be more than it is. It's not presenting itself as cosmically arranged for the benefit of its inhabitants. Things happen in it that are random and unjust and unexplained. Good people suffer, the lich exists, the mushroom war happened. The crown wound up in a Scandinavian dock worker's possession through no moral logic that anyone can trace, and was purchased by an unsuspecting antiquarian, and spent the next 1,000 years destroying him from the inside out, and none of that was earned or deserved or part of a plan. The world of Oo is the world as it actually is, dressed in candy colors. It does not protect its inhabitants from randomness. It does not ensure that effort is rewarded, or that love is sufficient, or that history bends toward justice. The Candy Kingdom got voted out of democratic government and nearly destroyed by a con artist. The hero's biological father is a selfish person who chose transcendence over accountability. A 1,000-year-old woman who outlived everyone she ever cared about spent most of those 1,000 years alone. The universe produced an entity dedicated to ending all life and gave him flesh in the same explosion that destroyed the civilization he'd been waiting for. None of this is comforting in the conventional sense, but the show holds it all without flinching and without despair, and that combination, eyes open, still here, still making music and building kingdoms and running through the candy forest, is the whole argument. Not that the world is good or just or arranged for your benefit, that it's here, that it's worth being present in, that the specifics of it, the texture of it, the people in it, they are enough. Not cosmically enough, just enough to get up tomorrow and try again. When the show ended in September 2018, after 10 seasons, it ended with a question built into its conclusion. The final shot of the main series shows the land of Oo 1,000 years further along. The landscape transformed again, new inhabitants, new kingdoms, new life grown over the old, and the implication is clear. This is what ooh does. It keeps going. It keeps changing. The things we spent 8 years caring about have become the new layer of ruins, the new ground floor under whatever comes next. That could be devastating. The show frames it as right, as the thing the show was always pointing toward, which is that continuation itself, the ongoing, impersonal, unstoppable movement of time and life and growth and change, is not a betrayal of what came before. It's the fulfillment of it. The world that Finn and Jake lived in was itself built on the ruins of the old world. The world that comes after will be built on theirs. And the fact that what they built will eventually be someone else's ruins doesn't make it less worth building. It makes it part of something larger than any individual moment, larger than the show itself, larger than any frame the characters inside it could put around it. The show's final gift to its audience, the thing that makes it possible to watch the 1,000-year flash forward without mourning, is the argument it spent 8 years making. The argument that being back then is not the same as being gone. That the time spent in ooh was real, and remains real, in the specific and unassailable way that the past is always real. You can't go back. You can't lose it either. You and the show will always be back then, which is to say, it happened. It was here, and that is permanent in the only way that matters. The theme song is still playing up somewhere. 30 seconds of ukulele and a voice that recorded it in a cramped room where you can still hear typing in the background if you listen closely enough. Imperfect, warm, and exactly what it needed to be. That's the show. That's exactly what it was. If you've been lying there in the dark with this for the last however long, thank you for that. Genuinely. The fact that this reached you at whatever time it is, wherever you are, and that we spent this time looking at something that matters to both of us, that's real. That's back then already, by the time you hear this, which means it's permanent. If something in here landed, leave a like. It helps more than you might think. Subscribe if you want to keep going down with me through the rest of what this show built. There's a lot more below the surface, and I intend to find it all. And drop a comment telling me which character felt most true to you when you were watching this, and why. I'm not just asking to fill the comments. I actually want to know. The adventure continues. It always does. There is a distinction that the show never states but consistently enacts, and it's worth slowing down on because it sits underneath almost every philosophical choice the show made. The distinction is between meaninglessness as a verdict and meaninglessness as a starting condition. If meaninglessness is a verdict, if the conclusion of the inquiry is that nothing matters and that's the final answer, then the logical endpoint is the lich. Pure, patient, cosmically justified destruction. If there is no meaning built into the fabric of things, and if you're willing to follow that conclusion wherever it leads, you end up at entropy. You end up at the position that clearing the board is at least as coherent as playing the game. But the show never treats meaninglessness as a verdict. It treats it as a starting condition. The universe doesn't come preloaded with meaning, and given that Adventure Time is set 1,000 years after a nuclear catastrophe that ended human civilization and warped the biology of the entire planet, The show has earned the right to say this without irony. And so the question becomes not whether meaning exists, but what you're going to build in its absence, whether the building is worth doing, whether what gets built can be called real even without cosmic endorsement. Every major character in the show is, in one way or another, answering that question. Marceline answers it with music. Jake answers it with presence. Finn answers it with the repeated decision to act, to show up, to be the person who helps when helping is possible, and who sits with the sadness when it isn't. Princess Bubblegum answers it by building things, and then slowly learning that the things she builds only have the weight she brings to them herself, that the candy people are real because she treats them as real, not because the universe confirmed their reality independent of her. Simon answers it in the Fiona and Cake spin-off by choosing to stay, by waking up in a world he never would have predicted and deciding that the teaching job is real, the classroom is real, the students are real, and that he has something worth giving them, the hard-won expertise of a man who learned what magical artifacts cost when they consume you. What unites all of these answers is that they are local. They are not universal. They don't claim to be. They are answers that work for a specific person in a specific set of circumstances, answers built from the materials that person has available, and the show never tries to generalize them into a theory that applies to everyone. Marceline's music is not a blueprint for how everyone should process grief. Jake's easy acceptance of mortality is his own, earned through his own experience, and the show is careful not to frame it as the correct answer so much as his answer. The fact that it happens to be a wise answer doesn't make it transferable. You have to earn your own version of it. This is one of the places where Adventure Time departs most clearly from the kind of inspirational philosophy that popular culture usually produces. It doesn't end with a speech. It doesn't arrive at a lesson that can be extracted and carried around as a prescription. It ends with individual characters finding individual ways to go on, and the effect of watching those individual ways accumulate across 10 seasons and multiple specials is something more like wisdom than a message. It gets into you sideways through specific moments and specific images, and it does different work depending on where you are in your own life when you encounter it. People who watched the show as children and come back to it as adults find different things in it. The Ice King is funnier to children and more painful to adults who have started to understand what slow forgetting actually feels like. Finn's relationship with his biological father lands differently when you're old enough to have worked through your own complicated feelings about parents. Jake's acceptance of death is something that registers as quirky on a first viewing at age 10 and as something much harder and richer on a rewatch at 30 after you've lost someone. The show doesn't change. What changes is the person watching it, and the show is deep enough to have something real to offer at most depths a person finds themselves at. That is not accidental. The show was built by people who were thinking about this, about what it means to be alive, about loss and memory, and the specific difficulty of caring for things that end, and who trusted, remarkably, that children could hold those thoughts too, not in the same way adults hold them, but in some preliminary, important way. The child who watched the show absorbed something they didn't have language for yet, and that thing waited in them, and years later they found the language, and they came back, and the show was still there, and it recognized them. There is a scene in the season 4 episode I Remember You that I want to spend time with, because it is the clearest example in the entire show of what gentle nihilism actually looks like in practice. Marceline has been carrying Simon's letters for hundreds of years. She has them on the backs of scrapbook pages, tucked away, kept not as relics, but as evidence when the Ice King comes to her cave and asks her to help him write a song. He has found some notes he thinks might be lyrics, and he doesn't know they were his. She takes the notes and she sings them back to him. The notes are apologies. They are Simon, writing from the edge of his own erasure, apologizing for what was coming, explaining that whatever the crown made him into was not really him, asking her to hold on to the distinction between who he was and what he would become. He couldn't know for certain that she would survive to read them, or that she would find him, or that the opportunity to sing them back to him would ever arrive. He wrote them because the writing was what he had, because putting the words down was a way of making them real in the face of everything that was trying to make them unreal. She sings them to him. He listens. He participates in the performance, trying to help, trying to contribute, offering suggestions in the cheerful, oblivious way of the Ice King, who doesn't know that what he's hearing is himself, doesn't know that the words he's listening to are the last thing the person he used to be said to the person she used to be. He has no recognition. There is no breakthrough, no moment where Simon surfaces through the madness to see her, no emotional reunion. She sings his words to him, and he doesn't know they're his, and the episode ends without resolution. The episode ends without resolution because resolution would be a lie. That is the philosophical precision of the choice. The show could have given that episode a moment of recognition. It would have been enormously satisfying. Finn and Jake react with tears, watching the performance from outside the window, and the audience cries too, and the Ice King just keeps not knowing, keeps not knowing, keeps not knowing, and the weight of what isn't happening accumulates in the space between what Marceline is singing and what the Ice King is hearing, and it is one of the most honest things television has ever done. Because the real world doesn't give you the resolution. The person you're trying to reach through a song, through a letter, through an act of love shaped by grief and hope and the specific desperation of someone who sees what's coming, they may not receive it. The message may arrive and find nothing there that can respond to it. The love may be real on your end and absent on theirs, not through malice or indifference, but through circumstances that neither of you chose and neither of you can change. And the right response to that, the response the show offers through Marceline's voice and her expression and the way she keeps singing anyway, is not to stop, not to perform the love only when it can be received. To sing because the singing is real regardless of whether anyone who needs to hear it understands it. That is what I mean by gentle nihilism, not the acceptance that nothing matters, the acceptance that things can matter without being guaranteed an audience, without being validated by response, without being kept safe by the universe from the indifference of circumstance. Simon wrote letters to a future that might not have included anyone to read them. Marceline sang them back to someone who couldn't hear them. Both acts were real. Both acts mattered in the specific, unverifiable, irreducibly personal way that things matter when there is no external arbiter and you make the choice anyway. Something worth saying about the specific historical moment that Adventure Time occupied, because context matters for understanding why the show's philosophy landed the way it did. The show premiered in April 2010 in the aftermath of a global financial crisis that had done significant damage to the idea that institutions, economic institutions, governmental institutions, the general structure of modern civilization, could be trusted to hold. The young adult audience that grew up with Adventure Time came of age in a period defined by the destabilization of exactly the kind of structures that the show's mythology treats as already ruins. The highway signs in the background of Oo's outdoor scenes resonated with people who had grown up watching the economic scaffolding they'd been told to rely on prove itself unreliable. The post-apocalyptic setting that the show arrived at by accident, through the joke about businessmen frozen in ice, turned out to be accidentally very timely. Not because audiences in 2010 thought civilization was about to end, but because they had started to feel, in a low-grade and persistent way, that the world they'd inherited was more fragile than they'd been told. That the ground beneath the candy colors of consumer prosperity and institutional stability was older and stranger and less secure than the surface suggested. That you might have to find your own meaning because the meaning that was supposed to be there for you wasn't going to materialize on its own. Adventure Time told those people, yes, the world is built on ruins. Your civilization is built on the wreckage of things that thought they were permanent. And also, the candy is real. The music is real. The friendships are real. The person running through the field with you is real. You build meaning because you choose to, not because someone handed it to you. And that choice, made daily, in the specific circumstances of your specific life, is the only kind that holds anyway. The other kind, the kind that comes from somewhere outside you and is supposed to be there whether you choose it or not, didn't survive the Mushroom War. Nothing did, except the things that kept choosing themselves. That message was not delivered as a message. It was delivered through the texture of the show, through years of small moments and slow reveals and songs written in cramped rooms and imperfect theme music that someone fell in love with and refused to replace. It arrived in the way that things arrive when they're true, not as an argument you can refute, but as a feeling you carry, changing shape over the years, revealing new angles as your life provides new vantage points. That's what Adventure Time built. Not a message, a world with enough depth to keep being discovered. The evergreen episode, which aired in Season 6 and takes place further in the past than any other episode of the main series, is perhaps the most precise encapsulation of the show's philosophy about meaning and the damage that desire can do when it runs unchecked through the wrong vessel. 650 million years ago, give or take, there was an ice elemental named Urgence Evergreen. He was ancient even by the standards of a show that measures age in millions of years. He was powerful and cold and capable, and he had an assistant, a small dinosaur he also called Gunter, who worshipped him with the uncomplicated adoration that very young creatures have for the beings who raised them. A catalyst comet was approaching. The green comet, the one associated with the Lich. Evergreen's plan was to build a crown that could grant the wish of its wearer and to wish the comet away himself. A reasonable plan, a plan that would have worked. He built the crown. He was preparing to use it. And then Gunter, who had watched him prepare, who wanted to be like him more than anything, who had spent months or years or however long it is that dinosaurs spend time in the presence of the beings who shape them, put the crown on first. The crown grants the deepest wish of its wearer. Gunter's deepest wish was to be like Evergreen. So the crown made Gunter into something like Evergreen, a distorted, incomplete version, because the wish was genuine, but the capacity to fulfill it was limited, and desire running through an imperfect vessel produces imperfect results. Evergreen was killed. The comet was not stopped. The dinosaurs went extinct. The crown survived. It was eventually found by Simon Petrikov, an antiquarian in Scandinavia, purchased from a dock worker who didn't know what he had. And the crown did to Simon exactly what it had done to Gunter, because the crown is still running Gunter's wish, still making its wearer into something like Evergreen, still trying to fulfill a desire that was encoded into it hundreds of millions of years ago by a small dinosaur who wanted, more than anything, to be worthy of the creature who cared for it. The damage that moves through time because someone loved their teacher. That is the chain. And none of the links were evil. None of them were even wrong, really, in the moral sense. Gunter's wish was as sincere and uncorrupted a desire as you could ask for. The wrongness was structural. The desire was too large for the vessel. The capacity to fulfill it was absent, and the result was a crown that has been consuming its wearers for 65 million years, one identity at a time, because the original wish it was shaped by was real and powerful and couldn't be completed. The show is making an argument here about the specific danger of desires that can't be completed. Not bad desires. The desire to be like the person you admire is not a dark impulse, but desires that exceed what's possible, encoded into something that persists beyond the person who had the desire, are capable of harm that no amount of original good intent can prevent. The crown isn't evil, it's just still running the program. Mechanical, indifferent, patient, doing exactly what it was built to do, long after the context that made the doing meaningful has been gone for geological ages. The Ice King calls his penguins Gunter. He doesn't know why. The crown knows why. The crown is always reaching back toward the moment that made it, always trying to complete the wish that shaped it, always calling out the name of the one who first put it on and wanted to be something more than they were. Simon didn't know that when he bought it from the dock worker. How could anyone? This is not a story with a moral lesson that can be extracted and applied. It is a story about the specific, terrifying depth of history, about how the consequences of a moment of sincere desire can move forward through time for longer than human civilization has existed, touching lives that had no part in the original act, shaping outcomes that no one would have chosen. The world contains so much of this. Not evil working its way forward, not malice, but the momentum of old sincere wishes finding new bodies to move through, old grief looking for new places to arrive, old love looking for new people to consume. The only answer the show offers to this is not a solution, but a commitment to know the history, to look at the chain, to understand as clearly as possible what you are part of and what you are carrying forward, and to make the choice that is yours, to make with as much clarity as you can manage. Simon couldn't have known about the crown's history, but he knew the crown was changing him, and he made the choices he made with that knowledge as clear as he could keep it. He wore it to protect Marceline. He wrote letters to warn her about what was coming. He documented his own dissolution with the rigor of a scholar who had spent his life believing that understanding things was worthwhile. He did what he could. That's all the show ever asks of anyone. Not that you solve the unsolvable, not that you prevent what can't be prevented, that you do what you can with what you know, as honestly as you're capable of, and that you document the process in case someone needs to find it later. That the note gets written even if you're not sure it will be read. That the music gets played even if the person it's for can't hear it. That the meaning gets made even if the universe doesn't confirm it. Let me close with Finn. Not the cosmic Finn, not the blue comet embodiment of heroism. The specific, particular Finn who grew up in the tree fort with Jake, who started the show at 12 years old and aged visibly across its run because the actor's voice was aging and the show chose honesty over convenience. There is something about the decision to let Finn grow up in real time, to not replace Jeremy Shada when his voice changed, to build the character's development around the actor's actual development that is consistent with everything else the show believed. You don't fix imperfection by replacing it with a more controlled version. You stay with it. You find what is true inside the change. Finn's voice changing was real, and the show treated it as real, and the effect was a character who actually felt like he was growing up rather than a character performing growth on a fixed timeline. He cracked and deepened, and the cracking and deepening was Finn, not a deviation from Finn. He started the show as the last human in Uu, a fact treated as interesting rather than tragic for the first few seasons, something that made him unique and special and worth following rather than something that should break him. He ended the show and then the specials as a young man who had been many things and who had lost real things and who had a tattoo of his best friend on his chest and who was still, as far as the evidence shows, fundamentally decent. Not as a given, as a choice made repeatedly in a world that gave him plenty of reasons to choose otherwise. His father left. His arm was taken, the person he understood himself to be, the last human, the hero, the boy in the hat who defeats evil and saves people, kept being complicated by things that didn't fit that story. He discovered the human settlement on the islands, populated by people who had chosen safety over freedom, and he didn't dismiss their choice or romanticize it. He saw it clearly, and he named it gently, and he went back to Oo because Oo is where the fight is, and Finn is the person who goes where the fight is, not because the universe assigned him that role, but because every time the choice came up, that's the direction he moved. The purple comet offered him an exit from all of it. Love, hate, sadness, video games, ice cream waffles, scoundrels, fathers, the whole impermanent, complicated, beautiful mess of being alive. He said no. He said I put a lot of work into this. He said he'd like to see it through. That is the whole show in those 3 sentences, not a cosmic statement, not a philosophical argument, a declaration of personal investment. I put work into this. I want to see where it goes. The struggle is not evidence that the struggle isn't worth it. The autumn leaf knows it's falling. The autumn leaf is still beautiful on the way down. None of this is original to Adventure Time. The philosophical territory the show was working in, the confrontation with meaninglessness, the choice to build meaning locally and personally in the absence of cosmic endorsement, the commitment to presence and care in a world that doesn't protect them, is ancient territory. People have been standing at this particular edge since long before animated television existed, since before television, since before Rang. The specific human problem of how to live in a world that doesn't explain itself has been producing art and philosophy and religion and music for as long as there have been humans capable of noticing the problem. What Adventure Time did was not solve this problem. What it did was make the problem feel livable for a generation that encountered it through a cartoon at an age when the questions were still forming in a form that was warm enough and honest enough and specific enough to stick. The people who watched it as children are adults now, in their 20s and 30s, navigating the actual business of lives that don't come with instructions. And somewhere in the furniture of their minds is a 1,000-year-old vampire playing bass guitar in a cave, and a dog who woke up excited about his death dream, and a boy in a white hat who was offered transcendence and wanted to see his meet reality through instead. Those images are working on people right now in ways those people don't necessarily have conscious access to. They are part of the deep structure of how a generation understands what is worth caring about and why, what it means to keep going when the going is hard, what counts as enough in the absence of an external judge of enough. That is what art does when it gets deep enough and stays there long enough. It becomes part of the structure you think with, not just the content you think about. Adventure Time got deep enough. It stayed long enough. It kept adding layers, kept trusting its audience, kept putting the most honest things in the backgrounds of the funny episodes, and trusting that the people who needed to find them would find them. And here we are, years later in the dark, with headphones, finding it. There is one more thing I want to leave you with. It is a small thing, but it is the show's smallest things that carry the most. In Season 6, Episode 26, Gold Stars, after the Lich surfaces through Sweet Pea's body and terrifies the King of Oo with a monologue about the monsters that existed before time, Sweet Pea comes back to himself. He stands there, panting, looking at his hands. He squeezes them. He says, "Just a dream." And then the episode cuts to the next morning. Tree Trunks and Mr. Pig at the breakfast table, Sweet Pea walking in, their voices overlapping as they greet him. Morning, son, Sweet Pea. And he goes to get his breakfast, and the family continues, and the Lich's cosmology, the monologue about monsters before time, is simply present in the same frame as a cartoon elephant, and a cartoon pig, and a giant toddler made of pure cosmic destructive potential getting breakfast with his family. The show doesn't try to reconcile those two things. It holds them in the same frame and moves on. The monsters were real. The breakfast is real. Both of those things can be true at the same time, and neither one erases the other. And the family that sits down together in the morning, knowing what Sweet Pea contains, they don't pretend it isn't there, and they don't let it be the only thing, is the show's most compressed and most beautiful image of what it is possible to build in full knowledge of the dark. Not ignorance, not denial, just breakfast, just morning sun. Just the ordinary morning continuing in full view of the extraordinary terror it contains, and the choice to be here anyway, together, getting breakfast, because that is what the morning is for. The adventure continues. It always has. It always will.